Item number 9, discussion on the future land use map amendment, considerations associated with the Kingston Pike, Smith Road, Boring Road study area. And again, this is for discussion purposes only.
Yeah, this is, again, just discussion, no action to be taken. This is dealing with our latest study or priority area. It's kind of in the central part of town. Kingston Pike, Smith Road, Boring Road study area is what it was called, and you can see it there on the screen outlined. The black line outlines the study area. Like other priority areas that we've looked at in the past few years, we engaged the community, that's living in this area or nearby, to try to assess whether the vision that was mapped in 2012, when we actually mapped our vision as part of our comprehensive land use plan, is current and up to date, or if there's some things that needs to be revisited. Just like we did at McPhee and Watt Road and Outlet Drive, we made modifications to the map in all those locations because there was things that were no longer current or conditions had changed. And that is, what we're looking at with this particular area. We had 3 public workshops that were all very well attended, and then we had a summary of the feedback that we received with our steering committee, which is also a public meeting. That was on May 23rd. This study area is a little bit different than the other 2. It's not quite as homogeneous as some of our other areas where we had public meetings. There's a lot of diversity in this area. You go from a very commercialized section along Kingston Pike to a very kind of rural agricultural part of town as you kind of feather your way out from Kingston Pike along parts of Boring Road and Boring Lane. So just a little background with the map that there is on the screen there. That was what was, most of that's what was mapped in 2012. And at the time, we were looking at this area as there's some existing residential communities there. The Ingalls at the time was in very poor condition, and the expectation was that that would probably be demolished. And this may be a good location for a mixed-use neighborhood. So a lot of the area along Kingston Pike, even over to N8 where NHC is, was mapped in the pink, which is mixed-use neighborhood. Let me highlight that just to. I might need to use a different color here. There's a lot of colors going on. So that's kind of this purple area, the mixed-use neighborhood. And, that's kind of a pedestrian-oriented type of development, kind of a scaled-down mixed-use town center. So to try to map out land uses that would provide for potential residential densities that could support the mixed-use neighborhood, some of the peripheral areas were mapped as medium density residential, and that's what's in the brown, these areas. And so it's getting a little cluttered now, but so the point is that since that original mapping, similar to, again, other parts of town that have changed, the Ingalls building was actually renovated and not demolished. So the idea of the mixed-use town center in that general location kind of went away, or mixed-use neighborhood. And so another thing that happened was some of our higher density residential, we got a development that was built north of the interstate. We have one that's under construction at South Watt Road, and then there's one over that's part of our town center at Biddle Farms project. That has a high-density multifamily component to it. And then we've had some attached single-family developments that have gone on in different parts of the town, like Ivy Farms townhomes, townhomes that will be part of the town center at Biddle Farms project. So all those things collectively help to address the need for additional housing choice, which is another one of our strategies in our plan that we were trying to accomplish. So it kind of becomes apparent, in looking at the map, that we need to acknowledge the changing conditions, the changing circumstances, maybe acknowledge where there are existing developments but aren't mapped in accordance with how they actually are in the field. And so what we put together, again, this is just for, again, discussion purposes only, was some areas where there could be some considerations for amendments to the future land use map. And what I was going to do is go through these. I tried to label them and then have that tied back to the text to describe what we're trying to do here. But this is kind of a proposed future land use map. One thing I wanted to be clear about, because I'm going to be talking about zoning later a little bit, the difference between a future land use map and a zoning map. Future land use map outside of the town center is it doesn't have embedded in it requirements. It's just a vision in a moment of time for what a community may do in a certain location. There's nothing that says it has to do that. There's no requirements tied to it. Whereas zoning is what you can and can't do with your property, how far buildings have to be set back from property lines, how much coverage you can have, all kinds of things that are regulatory in nature that you have to meet. So there's a big difference between the two. The one is just kind of a vision map. The other is requirements, basically. So when I go back and forth talking about those two, try to keep that in mind, because some of these considerations involve just making the map more consistent with the existing zoning or how the land's being used. And that would go to the first area there, Area A, and that's where the NHC is. Let me just highlight that if you can't point it out there. That's right here. And what may be a consideration there is that's currently mapped as mixed-use neighborhood and medium-density residential. Neither of those land uses are consistent with NHC. NHC is not going anywhere. So what we would recommend there is you change that to civic institutional, because that's a land use that's consistent with how the property is actually being used. The next area, and if y'all have any questions when I go through these, just let me know. I do have some people that have signed up to speak. The next area is B, and that's an area that is west of Enterprise Rent-A-Car, just to the south of part of Fox Den. It's currently zoned R4, which is attached single family. That allows a density of up to 6 units per acre. And on the future land use map, it's currently shown as medium density residential, which is 6 to 8 units per acre. So what we would look at there is maybe reclassifying that to low density residential, which is 3 to 6 units per acre, to be consistent with how the property is zoned. The next one is C. That's here, and that is the area that is between Enterprise and Weigels and to the north of those developments. That one, basically what we would do there, again, similar to NHC, is just acknowledge how those properties that are developed are actually being used. So they would be changed to commercial land use, and then the area to the north may be an option for mixed-use neighborhood as kind of a transitional land use between commercial and lower density residential, like you see at Fox Den, north of that. It'd be something similar to maybe the development that they're looking at doing out on Watt Road, that has the townhomes and small footprint commercial, to maybe transition transition in that area. So that's what we're looking at on C. We can come back to these and talk about them individually. Some of them are more straightforward than others, probably. D is the next area, and probably need to go to a different color. Let's do, I don't know, maybe blue. I already got too many colors on this. But D is where the old Ingalls and new Ingalls are mostly. And a lot of that's a mixed-use neighborhood, and I talked about earlier that really is probably not going to come to fruition as it was maybe expected to when this was originally mapped. So one thing to consider here is just, again, changing the land use to be consistent with how the property is being used and its zoning, which would be the commercial land use for those rather than mixed-use neighborhood. The next area is E, and that's basically a buffer that is north of the Ingalls and then also along Boring Road, and again consistent with how the property is actually currently zoned. Those areas are currently zone buffer. The open space land use would be more consistent with the zoning. They're currently mapped as part of a larger medium density residential land use, so that again would bring the future land use map into compliance, I guess, with how those little properties are zoned. This buffer strip here is about 100 feet wide to the north, and I think the other one is 25 feet along Boring Road. Next area is F. Let's see here. Okay, F is the area north of the Ingalls, and that area you start working your way into a little bit more of a rural setting, and what you have there. Currently, that area is medium density residential, and so what we would consider there is very low density residential, which is really not very low density residential. That's how it's classified in our plan, but it's actually 2 to 4 units per acre. The property is actually zoned R1, and so the density allowed by that land use would actually be about double how the property is currently zoned. But that would be more consistent with the existing development to the north, Baldwin Park and Waverly Court, to the west of that. And as you know, in our plan, there's a policy to basically have densities of new development to be compatible with existing adjacent density. So again, I think that consideration would address those elements of our plan. The next one is G, and this is between Baldwin Park and Waverly Court. And this is another area that we would consider probably be more appropriate as very low density residential. Waverly Court's an R4 development. That's up to 6 units per acre. Baldwin Park is R3. You're looking at less than 3 generally. So 2 to 4 is what's allowed under very low density residential. Again, it's almost double the density of how the property is currently zoned. It's mostly zoned R1. There's a small section on the south end of that. It's R2. But the very low density residential would be, a notable increase in density, and it would be a land use that's frankly more compatible with adjacent densities. H is the next area, and that's north of Boring Road, and the consideration there is to look at that area, start looking at some of these areas along Boring Road and Boring Lane as maybe rural residential land uses, and that's greater than 1 acre. it's, again, as you get further north and east on Boring Road, it does start to get a much more rural, kind of agricultural character to it. So the rural residential land use designation would be more compatible with the existing plan of development that's out there now. We know we've got a piece of property that's roughly 15 acres that an individual has bought. Of course, this could all change, but their intent is to have a farm. And so the land use designation to rural residential may be more compatible with how the property is likely to be used and is being used currently. It's currently shown on the future land use map as low density residential, which would actually be 3 to 6 units per acre, and that's a pretty substantial density in that location probably. I is another area that's kind of in that more rural part of this study area. It's kind of at the intersection of Boring Lane and Boring Road. As you make that turn, some really large oak trees and things through there. Property is currently zoned R1, and one thing to consider there as you kind of work your way into these more rural areas is to look at that as potentially a rural residential part of the study area, and that would be really consistent with a lot of the feedback, the predominant feedback that we receive from the community as you start getting into areas I and J. The agricultural land use was a very popular use under the visual preference survey in those areas. So rural residential may be a land use that would be more fitting for that. And the same would apply to Area J, and that's at the easternmost part of the study area, and where the Little Green Garden nursery is. And that, again, might be a candidate for rural residential greater than 1 acre. Again, there's nothing that ties any of the changes to the future land use map to a requirement. It's just a question of whether the map needs to be brought into more of an alignment with how the land is being used, things that have changed since 2012, and all these other considerations, community input. That's all that really this is about. They still would have to, if somebody wanted to do something with the property as far as actually develop it, they would have to, if they needed to do something different than how it's zoned, what's allowed on the property, they'd have to try to rezone it. And so that was something with that area, is looking at rural residential. I think that area also is currently specified as low density residential, which is 3 to 6 units per acre. And that's, really more in line with attached single family type of development. So that's kind of an overview of, what we're proposing, again, based on the feedback, the predominant feedback that we received at these 3 workshops. But again, these are just considerations, and I wanted to get everyone's input on, whether we're on track here. If there's specific areas you want to talk about further, we're certainly open to that. Now, I do have some people that have signed up to speak to this whenever you're ready.
You want to do that first?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Let's go with that.
We've got Doug Horne. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Doug Horne, 12103 South Fox Den. My daughter Susan's here. She lives in Fox Den too. And we have an attorney here, Ben Mullins, who's a Farragut resident with Franz McConnell and Seymour, our attorney. We totally disagree with the change of the land use plan. Let me remind everyone that in December of 12, our property, we have 50 acres there, 40 acres and 10 more. It was classified 6 to 12 units per acre, medium density. In 2018, it was arbitrarily changed to 6 to 8 units per acre. That's what it is now, 6 to 8 units per acre land use plan. That's what we have to keep. What you all know is very, very knowledgeable commissioners know, the land use plan has a lot to do with the value of the property. You can't rezone property unless it really adheres to the land use plan normally. Not the commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen will not do it. We had an example of that on Eddie Ford's property. The land use plan was changed. We came in with a development plan on Eddie's property, and it was killed because the land use plan had changed. The text amendment on the land use plan dictated you could only have multifamily in one mixed use between South Campbell Station, Concord Road, and Kingston Pike, which destroyed Eddie Ford's value of his property. We cannot tolerate, my daughter's here, we have 2 grandchildren, my wife and I. I'm an old Farragut graduate like David White. I graduated 1 year before David did, and we have been here for many, many years. We've owned this property for 42 years, and we will have to take legal action if you change the land use plan, because we know, and you know, that when you change the land use plan, it dictates what you do on zoning. That's example, prima evidence, Eddie Ford's property. So we've even offered a great builder, Mike Stevens, to develop 6 to 8 units per acre on this property. We also have even offered, and the mayor knows this, we've even offered to widen Boring Road at our expense. The town of Farragut doesn't want to widen Boring Road at your expense. We would widen Boring Road. That's a lot of money. It'd probably be $1,500,000 to widen Boring Road and curb and gutter it. But we have to keep the land use plan. The people that appeared at these meetings, and we were there too. Susan was there, I was there, some of our other people were there. And you cannot say that the whole community was involved on this specific property. Surely there were people right around it. I remember when Baldwin Park was built, we owned the property beside it. We didn't want Baldwin Park there. We'd rather kept it agriculture, kept Mr. Stewksbury's cattle on it. But it changed, growth happened, and it changed. We built Waverly Court. We built that ourselves, 4 units per acre, a long time ago, R4. This property, when you change the land use plan, it kills your value. It kills your monetary value, which hurts your family. So we can't agree that the land use plan be changed. You can't have a few people make comments at these workshops and then all of a sudden everybody changes the land use plan, which dictates what you can zone it. So unfortunately, I'm an old guy here in Farragut. We've been here for many years, but we will have to file legal action against the town and people in the town if you change the land use plan. So let's don't kid ourselves. Land use plan has a lot to do with what the Board of Mayor and Aldermen will zone it. So and we've offered again to widen Boring Road at our expense. We thought that was a great thing to offer the town, so you need to consider that. So with our attorney here, we have to protect our interests. You cut this land use plan down in half like you're talking tentatively about, it cuts our value down a few $1 million on this property. So we just can't stand it. Thank you.
The next speaker we have is John Holtzrager.
Good evening. I'll be brief. John Holtzrager, 345 Burning Circle, Baldwin Park. Mark, thanks for the historical overview of what's been happening with this area. I've only been involved with it since about 2015, and it's helpful to know the history there. The 3 workshops that we had were really well attended. We had a number of folks from this quarter attend. Mark, you probably know how many that was. I don't. But our point was we'd like to keep the zoning as it is. I'm not going to say that I'm an expert about what legal value the land use plan has versus the current zoning, but the feedback that we gave was that we'd like the R1 and R2 zonings to stay as they are. Mark said it really well when he talked about the rural character of the area and the consistency with the use of the land as it is today. I guess I'd like to invite some dialogue from this body about what you interpreted from the input you heard from the residents of that area. And, of course, Mark, any comments for or against what I've just said?
Do we have anyone else?
We don't have anyone else that's signed up to speak, no.
Does anybody else in the audience have any questions or comments?
Paul Johnson, 344 Bernie Circle. When we bought our house in Baldwin Park, we were unaware that the adjacent land was medium density potential. And this whole area is rural in nature. And, you know, he's owned this land for, as he said, over 40 years. He hasn't done a thing with it. And we established our home there, and we are happy there, and we don't want a huge, dense development right next to our subdivision. I think that basically, and there was a large group of people at those three hearings. I was to two of the three hearings because two of them were identical, and everyone I know of that are in that part of town wants it to be lower density, not medium density residential. Thank you.
Do you have any input on these considerations or any areas you want to talk about further?
Anybody on the planning commission?
I'll give you some background. Can I give you guys some background? Because I think that there's some confusion here. This plan was adopted in December of 2012. I think you guys and Noah were the only members that are on the current planning commission that were involved with that. So I don't need to review what you guys.
The original land use plan.
Yes. We have the right to plan based on Tennessee Code annotated section 13-4-201, which states in part, it is the function and duty of the commission to make and adopt an official general plan for the physical development of the municipality, and it goes through and explains some of the many ways that, many of the considerations we need. And at the end it says the commission may, from time to time, amend the plan. You go to the plan itself, and we have policy statements in our plan. And policy number 2 states the club should be updated as often as necessary to remain current. Even if no major changes occur, the plan should undergo a major review and update, if appropriate, at least once every 5 years. In 2017, the later part of 2017, we assembled a steering committee to do just that. In about 5 years, we started. We met and charted a path forward to review and update the plan if necessary, and decided to go with the review of the various corridors. So we picked Watt Road, McPhee Road, Snyder Road, Outlet Drive. This Kingston Pike sub-area was on that list. Concord Road.
Concord, yeah.
And the mixed-use town center were all kind of put in there.
Say McPhee.
Yes, I said McPhee. So that's where we are. Staff established a process. We started with Watt Road, and that was where you were all involved. We were looking for that crosswalk was what kind of brought those neighbors in. But we went through. We had the pictures and the same process that we kind of went through with Kingston Pike sub area has been used consistently throughout this process. So we've been consistently using a process to review and adopted and amended our land use plan based on feedback, not just the comprehensive plan itself, but also in citizen input. It was expressed that they thought the the density range for medium density was too broad, from 6 to 12 units per acre, and they wanted it to be broken out into medium density and high density. And of course, then we had to go redefine medium density and high density. And in that, we've also redefined a few other areas. So that's kind of what we've been going through, is reviewing the plan. Obviously, you guys, most of you have been on board since we started reviewing the plan and updating it. So that's where we are today. I will say that Mr. Horne's property has been, I was back in the vault for a couple of days last week, just doing some review, and did not know this was something I learned. So when the town of Farragut was founded in 1980, we basically had to adopt the map as it was zoned for Knox County, because we did not have a zoning ordinance yet. We did not develop our own zoning ordinance until 1982. Ordinance 82-11, which was adopted March 16th, 1982, where we also adopted the zoning map, which I believe was probably their first shot at doing some kind of land use planning, because the original, when we were founded, the original map, we had a ton of property zoned agricultural. And when they came in with the new zoning ordinance, they rezoned a lot of property, commercial and R1 and R2. So it was very interesting to see. So the Mr. Horne's property has parts of it have been rezoned. Parts of it were residential, and then the commercial part, both Ingalls, the old Ingalls and the new Ingalls, went in there and they rezoned a portion of the residential portion to commercial, and that's where you got the buffer. They added the buffer in, and that was originally R1 or R2, and they put the buffer in. So this property that's existing property that's not developed has been zoned R1 and R2 since 1982. And they're still zoned that way. And there's a use, by right, they have a use to zone under R2 or R1 and build out under R2 or R1. I will say that Baldwin Park, it was interesting because I went back and checked the density, because on the original map that we adopted, Baldwin Park was listed as low density, 3 to 6 units per acre. It's actually 2.34 units per acre, which is why the color has changed. So that's some of the background in all of this. I think the only concern I have, I know that Boring Road right now is, obviously, Mr. Horne has a right to utilize his property, R1 OSR would probably make sense. Some of those properties have subdivided as estate-sized lots. My only question would be J. I know it's written out as rural residential, but it is surrounded by low-density, single-family.
Yeah.
I don't know how the property owner feels about. It would make sense as rural residential, certainly, estate-sized lots, because they already exist there. But I wonder how you fold that into the rest of it. But that's my only observation.
Anybody else have any thoughts or input on this? Or
I just want to say that I see the comprehensive land use plan as it's not legally binding to us. It's more of a plan. It's not the zoning at all. And that comes along when the property is sold or somebody wants to develop it, the zoning, more so than what we do now with the comprehensive land use plan. I guess I see it more as a guide. Am I wrong in that, Mark?
yeah, that's really what it is. It's like I said, it's a vision. It's a vision, text, and map. It's very different from zoning outside of the mixed-use town center, because that does have more requirements associated with it because of the way it was adopted. But in other areas of the town, it really is just a vision at a moment in time, which, as the plan itself talks about, that time needs to be constantly revisited to see if it's still current. Things have changed since this was originally mapped that, we didn't necessarily have any control over.
Right.
I mean, there was things that we expected to happen that haven't happened, and there's things that have happened in other parts of the town that have addressed why some of these areas were mapped the way they were originally. So, and that's things that we've made modifications in all of these areas that we've had community involvement in. We've
Right.
changed the land use plan, the map pretty substantially on Watt Road, and we made some changes to our zoning ordinance. We created the Neighborhood Convenience Commercial District. That was largely came through our discussion, our public meetings with the dealing with the Watt Road corridor. People wanted to have a kind of a scaled down, type of commercial option that would blend in better and transition better, where you've got nearby residential areas that they could perhaps walk to it. And that was kind of the original vision of this part of town, is that old Ingalls would get torn down, and we might have, because it is right there in the central part of town, and it has some existing subdivisions nearby, that could be a walkable mixed-use neighborhood. And the medium-density residential at that time was seen as potentially a land use that could provide for the kind of density that you might need to support that type of development. But again, that's just a map, a vision, a land use. It's not, the zoning has always been, like Louise said, R1 and R2, and that's what you can actually do with the property. And that's, a density of less than 2 units per acre. So,
Can I say something else, Rita? Mm-hmm. Of course, we built the Ingalls. We sold the land to Ingalls and provided a lot of sales tax for the town. We did Kohl's, we did Walmart, we did CVS. We've done a lot of things for the town too. You leaders have done a lot. Us private leaders have done a lot too. We know, you all know, when you change the land use plan, you bring a zoning request in. Mark knows too. We won't get it. You'll rely on the land use plan. Sure, you say it's a guide, but look at the Eddie Ford example. The land use plan changed. We came in with Eddie to do a mixed-use town center, and we were stricken down because you changed the text amendment on the land use plan. It stopped him from being able to do multifamily. We all are knowledgeable people here. You change the land use plan, we can't get the zoning. So if you change the land use plan that you had in place in 2012 and 2018, went to 6 to 8, we've lost our value. We have no course but to sue. You can't take people's family property away from them. That's what you're doing. So I don't know how to be any more clear about that. Y'all all know I'm right about this.
I was just about to add the property there in J, and part of that I know is the Borings property. They can sell it to anybody they want to.
Well, the value's gone. You change the land use plan, the value's gone.
It's always been zoned R1. That's what the value is R1.
It's R1, but we were going to file rezoning, Louise, because the land use plan was 6 to 8 per acre. We have a builder, Mike Stevens, you guys know him. That's what we're going to do. And also, I told the mayor we have an assisted living property that's going to come in there maybe for 10 of the acres, which is another assisted living. But the land use plan is what us private property landowners look at as the way you market your property. We marketed this property as mixed, as medium density residential. If you cut our legs out from under us, we've lost our value. So let's don't kid ourselves, Louise. You're kidding yourself.
I'm not kidding myself. I've listened to what the residents have said on several corridors. I understand that.
Listen to the property owners. We own the property.
And it's been zoned R1 since 1982. So that's what you have rights to.
No, we have rights to the land use plan.
You don't have rights to the land use plan.
No. We'll see, we'll see who's got rights.
So it's getting late. I just wanted to pose one question to this body. Mr. Horne and the community are on opposite sides of this issue, clearly, and I don't think we're going to reach agreement tonight. I respect him and what he's done for the community, but this has been an over 7-year skirmish that we've been running with multiple developers coming in and many of the community talking about what their views are, and of course Mr. Horne talking about what his view is. My question for this body is, according to our process in the town, what are next steps? We've collected all the input from the community. We've heard from Horne Properties. What happens next?
We'll let the court decide. That's what happens.
What's the process?
Well, I mean, you know, again, this is just for consideration. So, you know, the next step would be to show some proposed amendments to the future land use map in this case. There may be some other things that come out of all this with like a text amendments and things like that, just like we did with Watt Road.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. So, you know, that would be the next logical step. What we were trying to obtain tonight was just, you know, everyone's feedback on these different areas and what we're thinking about or what we're throwing out as considerations. The rural residential area that Louise was talking about, you know, that could very, very well be very low density residential in some of those areas, I think. You know, I don't really know what that would be kind of compatible with Village Green and, you know, what's kind of surrounding a lot of that. It's not really compatible with how the property is actually currently being used. But those are some considerations. That's one area that I think you could logically look at that as a potential land use for that area as well, because it would be you know, kind of a compatible. It would actually be a higher density, similar to Mr. Horne's property. A lot of that, you know, very low density residential would be a density that's double what its current zoning would allow. So,
Potentially.
You know, potentially. You know, again, it's just a vision. It's just, there's nothing that is tied to any requirements with this outside of the mixed-use town center. I think what we're trying to do is take the community input, make some modifications to the map, just like we've done in these other priority areas that seem to be logical, or bring the map in line with existing developments and conditions that have changed over time. That's exactly what we did in all these other areas. There's no difference.
Is that, anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, I've got a few thoughts, but I thought going through these sectors was trying to build a consensus. Doug, don't run off. Doug, don't run off. I may have a question for you. Well, mine too. I think we're about the same age.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I thought these sector plan meetings was trying to build a consensus, and I guess this is the first one that's come up where we've really gotten some feedback, and I'm trying to scratch my head. I for one, have always seen this ever since we came up with the comprehensive land use plan in 2012. We've kind of struggled with what, you know, some people want to codify it and make it like an ordinance, you know, which is the incorrect usage. And others, like you're saying, it's more, you know, it's more tied to the value of your land, which I'm scratching my head on that compared to what the actual zoning of the property. If I'm looking at buying that piece of property, I'm looking at what it's zoned for, and I'm the only one that can request to rezone my land unless there's something going to be a taking. At least I'm not a lawyer, but that's my rudimentary understanding.
But let
me ask a question.
Yeah.
Do you disagree with your current zoning?
No. Well, no. What you do is when you have property and you have a land use plan, you market the property to users that talk to you because of the land use plan shows, like this property, medium density residential. And then when you get a deal ready to go, you come in and do your zoning. That's when you ask for the zoning. But that adheres to the land use plan. I wouldn't zone the property until I was ready to actually build on it. And we offered senior living apartments that were, of course, stricken down, like John Holsterler said, that was stricken down. But we'd offered to widen Boring Road at our expense. Now, that widen Boring Road from Baldwin Park down to Kingston Pike probably cost $1.5 million. And we've offered to do that as long as we adhere to the land use plan. But you never zone the property a different zoning until you're ready to develop it. And we weren't ready to develop it yet. It's got, like I said, we've got another land assisted living users coming in for 10 acres of the 50 acres. We may come in for zoning on that S1 zoning or whatever.
But
we don't want to
if you
zone
were-
it S1 now because we don't have the deal completely ironed out with the other assisted living user. See,
Well, I will say that
But if the land use plan throws out a vision that's compatible with what you're thinking, maybe to rezone in the future,
yeah, that's right.
then what's the issue?
That's right. No, that's right. It's fine. The medium density residential land use plan is what we've always relied on in talking to builders and talking to other prospects, that it would just be zoned to adhere to the medium density residential. Now you're talking about, because sure, Baldwin Park would rather be cut down to R1 only. Whenever they bought that property, we lost the bid on that property to Saddlebrook at the time by $25,000. We'd rather left it agricultural. We were the next door neighbor. We'd rather it been agricultural. But we got a good Baldwin Park. We did the Waverly Court. We built that ourselves with Saddlebrook when I was a partner with Saddlebrook. But you never zone the property till you're ready to use it, but you do adhere to the land use plan.
But that's back to my
That's the way
point.
developers do.
I'm still scratching my head. If the land use plan would accommodate your future rezoning,
Yeah, it would
then
now.
what's the issue?
It would. No, it would. It will. But you're talking about changing the land use plan. See, no, it will. The land use
If it's
plan
a
now
vision of what
adheres
you
to
have
the,
in the you envision in the future, then
the 6 to 8
what's
units
the
per
issue?
acre is fine. It's fine. It's what you got on the land use plan. It's fine. Just
Ed
keep
and I,
it that
Ed and
way.
I have been here a while, and we have, and so until was it 2012? Is that when we did the
December
land?
2012.
Okay,
when you adopted
prior to that, I had never heard of a comprehensive land use plan.
We didn't have one.
We didn't have one.
It was kind
And
of a new thing.
Well, we had a policy plan,
Had
a
a policy
transportation and land use policy plan.
plan.
The first time we actually mapped the vision was in 2012.
Right, and there was never any discussion about a land use plan. And
We went through a whole series of meetings and
See,
right,
Ralph
and then at
McGill.
that point we brought in consultants and they came up with this comprehensive land use plan. But prior to that,
Rita, Ralph McGill came to me 15 years ago when he was mayor and said, Doug, you've done a lot in the community. You've helped us a lot with sales tax. What do you envision your property being over on Boring Road? I said, well, 6 to 12 units per acre would be fine. And that's what Ralph got implemented. Then it changed to 6 to 8. And like Ed said, we're happy with 6 to 8. That's good. We'll file for zoning 6 to 8 units per acre. But if you cut us down to 2 or 3 per acre or 4 per acre, that cuts our value of our land down. We've built shopping centers all over the 20-some states, and a lot of times we would get a zoning that was higher than land use plan. You never get zoning less than land use plan. You get zoning higher than land use plan, like commercial shopping center when it called for agricultural, for example. So the private interest in this community with the land, private property rights, you can't just run over people with land use plan changes, because we've been talking to people and marketing our property based on the land use plan. So if you change it, summarily change it again, it kills us, and we have to fight. There's no other choice.
Yeah. Well, thanks. You're helping
Our
me with my
family-
creeping
our family would
comprehension.
want me to.
okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments with this? Okay.
Want me to put something together for a recommendation next time?
Please.
Okay. All right.
I believe I just heard Mr. Horne state he was the one who put the idea to have that as medium density to begin with. And it was his idea to make it medium density and his only. So that's, he just said, that's what he just said. It was his idea to make it medium density. And that's, most of the people don't want it that way. I know of people who are looking to buy homes in our subdivision, and they don't come on the market that often. There's one that's about ready to come on there now, and they're waiting to have Mr. Horne sell the land to a developer to have a similar type development like Baldwin Park next door to us. Not necessarily with the park, but with the homes. So there's demand for the single-family homes. So I just want to, I'm not getting a good feel from how you folks are thinking about this yet, how you'd consider this. But the other thing he said, that he shot down, that you shot down his idea for Eddie Ford's property. Well, Hy-Vee currently has a contract on to buy the entire Eddie Ford property, and they're looking at only using the front 20 acres for their grocery store, and they're looking at doing compatible development similar to Glen Abbey and the Park Place on the other side, which seems very ideal. So I take counter to what Doug was saying, that, you guys are shooting down everything he comes up with, but when his ideas aren't proper, I feel fortunate you have shot him down. Thank you.
I would like to make a statement of clarity. The property, the Ford, the development that was proposed for the Ford property didn't get past the Planning Commission because there was no traffic impact study filed. That it couldn't go forward without it.
Also looking at apartments.
And the transitions policy was what was discussed primarily between Glen Abbey and Park Place.
It was completely different than anything we'd ever considered for
Yeah.
that.
So those issues it was a transition. It wasn't the changes that we made to the land use plan or the definition. It was transitions policy and the fact that a traffic impact study was not done.
Yeah. Contrary to all the misinformation that's been put out there about that.
Okay, so in this case, I'm moving on to approval of utilities. We have no utilities.
Done.
And citizens forum, is there anyone who wishes to make a comment on something we haven't already discussed?
Well, Doug Horne did sign up for that, but I think he's already left.
So,
He's out in the hall, probably, to see somebody ask him if he still wants to speak.
All right.
In that case, the August 8th.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
The August 18th, 2022 meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Mark.